Alright, my name is Mtunzi Masoga and I would like to talk about potential global movement. I've already termed it the alternative world movement because I've felt that there's a need for us black people to find ways that could help us design our own social system. In other words, for us to take our future into our own hands and thus develop a world which is conducive for us based on our talents and past experiences. Supposedly, the general black person is educated to work within the same system which was provided for us by white people. And if this is the case and this system was built using violence, how can then we expect that we can end gender-based violence as well as racism without ever having been in a situation to propose a social system ourselves? What I'm trying to say here is that our respect or the respect of other nations for us depends on what we can do for them as well as ourselves. If we were to study nature, we'll realize that every animal or every living species depend on its own nature for survival. In other words, as black people, we have no reason depending entirely on what was provided for us by whites. And so I came up with the concept of saying raising money about, say for instance, donating 5 rands or 20 rands and having about 20,000 people participating or donating per month. Presumably with only 1 rand donations and having about 20,000 participants would raise 20 million participants would raise 20 million rands flat. And if we would continue this every month and buy land, if we can find land available, then we can use the money to develop the cities. Now the world in which I'm proposing will be cities which will be self-governed. In other words, they wouldn't depend on these governments for anything. In other words, there will be no policing, no schools as we know them, and no money, no business as we know it. Instead, it will be a completely new social design and social system. And for that to happen, we have to first look at the current system as to what are its flaws, as well as its history and its potential failures. And if we were to understand that the current system, the monetary system that is based on debt, in other words, that countries have to borrow money from independent institutions such as the World Bank and pay it back with interest. And if we were to consider the fact that companies can be richer than countries. Take for instance the case of Toyota. Toyota is richer than South Africa, yet it's just a company. Toyota does not have universities, does not have to feed citizens, send them to school, protect them during pandemics, etc. And so if companies can be richer than countries, doesn't that tell us that the policies of our countries can be manipulated by those who have power to influence what is necessary or essential for their businesses to continue making profit? So with this understanding, it becomes very obvious that the monetary system is a big gamble, which when it collapses, we'll find ourselves in unpayable debt and thus lose our liberties. And so before such things can happen, it will be wise for us to come up with potential solutions. Say for instance, if the United States of America as well as Europe were to be destroyed by, let's say, natural catastrophe, such as assume a tsunami or an explosion, or America finds itself in the North Pole, and those countries are both taken out of this planet. The majority of us would suffer tremendously because we have depended on this Western life. In other words, all of a sudden we'll have no access to some of the things we're so used to, such as cars, fuels, and many others. And the world economic system as we know it would suddenly collapse. And so it's always wise to have a spare so that whatever happens to what you consider to be your favorite or original could be remedied in terms of a crisis. And so these self-governed cities I was proposing would be in forms of circles modeled on ancient societies which existed long before the other races were born on this world. And so these circles will be divided into 3 tiers. And on the middle, you'll have about 24 elders made up of 12 men and 12 women. And this will be the first cap of your pyramid. In other words, our systems of government were based on a pyramid scheme which has 24 elders, 144 chiefs, and just about 144,000 judges at the bottom. and ultimately everyone will be part of the government or the ruling class. The idea behind this is to do away with monopolism, which thus guarantees wealth for others as well as poverty and lack for the rest of us. If we were to examine our history and look into religions, including the Bible, during the time that the Israelites wanted to have a king, and this was because of what they saw amongst other nations, the God of Israel recommended or tried to stop them from copying these civilizations which surrounded them, because he saw it as an act of a rebellion. The reason for that is because whoever we put as our leader or our king, we end up worshipping them. And to worship is to love, respect, honor, etc. And so when we cannot worship ourselves, we worship whatever is in front of us and is designed for us to worship. And therefore, if we can no longer worship ourselves or God, it means that our sense of priorities, our values will then be twisted. As a matter of fact, God reprimanded Israel, saying that if you do such a thing and allow a certain man or individual to rule over you, he will take the best of land and everything else. In other words, he will take for himself and his favorite friends or elites the best resources and assign your sons into wars as soldiers, into hard labor, taxes, and many other things which might leave the rest of the people poor, whereas the elites, that is the governing class, will remain excessively rich. In other words, it's not God's will that we are ruled by individuals. According to nature, the most basic geometric pattern is a circle. In other words, the circle is not only original but also perfect because it has equal sides. And so if you are to build a normal society or society that can grow to infinity, in other words, which might exponentially grow without any neglecting any of its citizens, then it can only be in a form of a circle modeled after perfection. And these circles will be divided into 12 zones with 3 tiers, like I said before. And the 12 tiers or 12 zones will be used to divide the people into 12 groups based on their months of birth. This is to ensure that every star sign or types of people are well represented, as well as schools understood and thus used appropriately for the development of that particular region, city, or town. Suppose a child was to be born and you have astrologers who will work out the skies and determine the exact time of that child's birth, the name they're supposed to be given, the attributes as well as talents that you'll be bringing. And then the elders of that particular tribe, in other words, suppose the child is born in March or in July and their star sign is Cancer. And so the kings or the elders of that particular tribe would go to and welcome the child, give them a name, and ensure that they will have the best life available. As soon as the child grows old enough, he will move from his parents' place and go to the allocated region where he will live with his tribesmen. And also, this was done in order to have a very viable census where every citizen is born and thus educated to fulfill exactly what they are capable of. That was a general overview. I'll talk to you again, expanding on the possibility of a different social system which we can use to to solve all our potential problems.